Hi everybody, welcome to vlog, I think it's 6, and we're continuing our talk about assessment. Um, I'm going to avoid any kind of naming of, the technique or whatever, because there's just so many names that mean the same thing. I mean, you just Google around for a while, you're going to find alternative assessment, you're going to find dynamic assessment, authentic assessment. There's just lots of topics. Okay, but it comes down to the thing that's the oldest thing in history. Every parent knows, every teacher knows that it's all just talk, except for when you're kneeling next to a child who's having some trouble, making eye contact, and hearing their own experience. That realness, that authenticity is, as I said in the last video, that's the grounding stone. That is the everything needs to connect to that. The problem with so much of what is happening now is that standardized tests and so forth, they don't have a connection to that for whatever reason, because the people who are making the standardized tests don't have a connection with that. In the very act of trying to get a bigger picture, we're losing the bigger picture. The data is not helping us make better choices about how to teach individual people. Okay, so all right, so you have this idealized world where a teacher has all the time that they need to get to know every one of their students and has all the time that they need to draw out the state of their students' understanding of the topic at hand in whatever manner, feels the realist to the child, whether it's actually doing it, like I said, where they write and then you can see whether they understand about run-on sentences, or in the case of e-toys where they're making e-toys projects. I mean, I can sit down and just watch a child using e-toys and I know where they are. It is self-evident. And I also know by the kind of questions that they ask, I know where they're leaning, I know the things they like, I know the things they don't like, and so forth. And that experiential assessment is critical. And so I guess the first thing I'm going to say is no assessment measures can obscure or ignore that essential, authentic experiential assessment, that one-on-one experiential assessment. Today I was talking to Christine Mirakami, and she was calling it like the vibe. Okay, putting out your feelers, trying to figure out where your kids are. So, it has to all be vibe based. Okay, so this is vibe assessment, right? Okay, now that's great one-on-one. You got, one or two teachers in a class of 20 kids. The teacher, of course, is going to get to know the kids over a long period of time. There's no doubt. The question is, how does that teacher's experience of the child, the progress of the child, how can that be communicated in a way up the chain that is truly useful, to the principal, for example? How does the teacher enable a great principal to help them? How does a teacher communicate to a parent in a way that helps the parent help their children? What is the best way to summarize progress in a way that ultimately can connect even higher up at the level of school district or state? How do you boil it all down without losing the realness? Well, I was going to pause there, but I don't know how to pause. I didn't think. So I'm going to think out loud. I'm just going to look at you and say, okay, here's how I think. It's a huge question, and I think I'm gonna go with what I know, which is software engineering, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about agile and test-driven development, some practices that have evolved over the last decade that have had a measurable, palpable impact on how people like me make software. Okay, it used to be the case where a bunch of people would get together and they'd make a plan. And then they throw the plan over the fence to a bunch of developers, and then they make the software. And then they throw it over the fence to a bunch of testers, and then the testers would say whether it worked or not. And this, which is called the waterfall model because it goes in one direction, is fraught with error and ends up costing tons of extra money, and people end up not getting what they want. And the reason is it's not really connected with what's real. So if we use the same metaphor that I'm using with teachers and students, let's talk about programmers and stakeholders. Okay, so a stakeholder is somebody that wants something to happen in a software product, and a programmer is somebody that actually does it. Okay, so now I guess in this sense, the programmer is actually the teacher, and let's say the stakeholder is the parent or the principal. Okay, and the software is the student. Okay, so it doesn't quite match, but it does in a way. Okay, so the most important thing about test-driven development is that it starts at the lowest level. And, I don't mean this in any, pecking order kind of way, but I mean, in terms of where the actual work is getting done. In a school, the actual work is getting done by a student being guided by a teacher. In a programming project, the actual work is getting done by a computer being guided by a programmer. So a programmer says, okay, I'm going to write this algorithm that applies trust metrics to this collection of this collection of data to come up with a particular magic number. Okay, so he's given that the architect gives him some kind of general idea what he has to do, and so he has to write this. So in today's world, what a programmer does, the very first thing that a programmer does is they write a test. And they don't just write some vague test. They write a real test in code that when they're done with their little job is going to prove that it works. So this is why they call it test-driven development. So, and these are called unit tests because they're at the level of a unit or, the second smallest level of programming scope. Okay, so so the programmer writes these tests, and they write lots of them every time they do something. So so a given programmer could write 10 or 15 of these tests a week, and they're all automated so that at the end you can push a button. It's going to run it through all the unit tests and verify that the program is behaving as expected. So how is the program behaving as expected? Well, the tests that the programmer wrote are coming through with flying colors. And if there's any changes, if there's any new bugs that are introduced, it'll pinpoint exactly where this is happening, and so it gives useful information to the programmer, which is, hey, the thing you just did broke this. Here's where to look. Okay, why am I talking so much about programming? Because a similar model, test-driven development, I think, can be used to ground assessment in the classroom, and it can also be generalized in a way that gives more accurate information up the chain to the principal, to the superintendent, to the state. And I'll talk more about that in the next